Margaret Sullivan stood frozen in the doorway of the American military hair salon, her weathered hands trembling as she touched her matted, lice-infested hair that hadn't been properly washed in 3 years. The 22-year-old German auxiliary nurse, captured along with thousands of other female personnel during the Allied advance through France, couldn't comprehend why her American captors had brought her here instead of the interrogation room she'd expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The transformation began on a crisp October morning in 1944 at Camp Rosewood, Virginia. Margaret was among 8,500 German female prisoners of war held across 17 specialized facilities in America. These women, ranging from Wehrmacht auxiliaries to Luftwaffe signal operators, Red Cross nurses to administrative personnel, had been captured during the liberation of Europe. Unlike their male counterparts, who numbered in the hundreds of thousands, these female prisoners presented unique challenges that would revolutionize American military detention policies and create unexpected bonds between former enemies. The journey to that hair salon had begun 6 months earlier, in a bombed-out field hospital near Caen, France. Margaret had been treating wounded German soldiers when American forces overran their position. She expected execution. Nazi propaganda had convinced her that Americans would show no mercy to German women. Instead, she found herself wrapped in a blanket, given hot coffee, and transported to a collection point with surprising gentleness. The American medic who processed her, Captain Dorothy Hayes, spoke broken German and assured her repeatedly that she would be safe. The Atlantic crossing aboard the USS Hampton revealed the first glimpses of a different world. While Margaret and 1,200 other female prisoners huddled in converted cargo holds, they received 3 meals daily, more food than they'd seen in months. American Women's Army Corps personnel distributed soap, toothbrushes, and sanitary supplies without the contempt Margaret expected. She watched through portholes as WAC officers moved freely about the ship, carrying themselves with a confidence she'd never witnessed in German military women. Camp Rosewood sprawled across 300 acres of Virginia countryside, its neat rows of barracks surrounded by chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. But within those boundaries lay facilities Margaret couldn't have imagined. A fully equipped hospital where German nurses could continue their medical training under American supervision. A library stocked with books banned in Nazi Germany. Educational classrooms where prisoners could learn English, typing, and even accounting. Most shocking of all, a beauty parlor operated by American volunteers who insisted on treating the prisoners as women first, enemies second. The initial days tested every assumption Margaret held about Americans. Her barracks leader, Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, enforced rules firmly but fairly. When Margaret witnessed a German prisoner slap another woman accused of fraternization, she expected collective punishment. Instead, Sergeant Walsh conducted individual interviews, determined fault, and administered proportionate discipline. The concept of justice based on evidence rather than suspicion was revolutionary to women raised under totalitarian rule. Margaret's first interrogation came 3 weeks after arrival. She sat across from Major Patricia Morrison, an intelligence officer who spoke flawless German and seemed to know more about Margaret's unit than Margaret herself remembered. But instead of threats or violence, Major Morrison offered cigarettes and genuine curiosity about medical practices in the Wehrmacht. The session felt more like a professional consultation than an interrogation. When Margaret mentioned losing medical supplies during the retreat, Major Morrison arranged for American medical texts to be delivered to the camp hospital. She watched Captain Hayes perform surgeries using techniques and equipment beyond anything available in wartime Germany. The American nurses shared knowledge freely, teaching procedures that would have been closely guarded secrets in the German military. This professional respect, extended even to enemies, challenged everything Margaret believed about American character. Cultural education programs began subtly. Movie nights featured films showing American women in various professions: doctors, lawyers, business owners, pilots. Margaret initially dismissed these as propaganda until she met Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson, the camp's deputy commander, who had earned her medical degree before joining the military. The existence of women in positions of genuine authority, not merely decorative roles, sparked intense discussions in the barracks. Could women really achieve such positions in America, or was this elaborate theater for their benefit? The camp newspaper, edited jointly by American personnel and trusted prisoners, became a window into American society. Margaret read about women's suffrage, the ongoing debates about women in the workforce, and the contributions of American women to the war effort. She learned about figures like Amelia Earhart, Eleanor Roosevelt, and the women Air Force service pilots. These weren't the subservient homemakers Nazi propaganda had portrayed, but complex individuals navigating freedoms German women couldn't imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Food became an unexpected ambassador for American culture. The mess hall served portions that seemed impossibly generous to women accustomed to wartime rationing. Fresh vegetables, meat at every meal, desserts that weren't reserved for officers, and unlimited bread challenged their understanding of American resources. But it was Thanksgiving 1944 that truly stunned the prisoners. American personnel insisted on serving the traditional feast to everyone, guards and prisoners alike. Margaret tasted turkey, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie, while American volunteers explained the holiday's significance. The concept of a national day dedicated to gratitude, not military victory or political ideology, was profound. The Christmas celebration exceeded all expectations. Packages arrived from American churches and women's organizations, addressed to German POWs at Camp Rosewood. Margaret opened a box containing hand-knitted mittens, chocolate, soap, and a card signed by an elderly woman in Iowa wishing her peace and hope for better days ahead. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. These Americans, whose sons and husbands were dying fighting Germans, sent gifts to German prisoners. Margaret spent hours staring at those mittens, trying to reconcile this kindness with the hatred she'd been taught to expect. Medical emergencies revealed American values most starkly. When Corporal Lisa Mueller developed appendicitis, she received the same urgent surgery any American soldier would have gotten. Margaret assisted in the operation, watching American doctors work through the night to save an enemy's life. Post-operative care included penicillin, still rare and precious, administered without hesitation. When Margaret asked Captain Hayes why they would waste such valuable medicine on a prisoner, the response was simple: because she's a human being who needs help. The integration of German medical personnel into the camp hospital created professional relationships that transcended national boundaries. Margaret worked shifts with Lieutenant Sarah Coleman, a surgical nurse from Texas, who shared her experiences from North Africa and Italy. They compared treatment protocols, discussed medical innovations, and gradually moved from professional courtesy to genuine friendship. Sarah introduced Margaret to medical journals, sharing articles about new surgical techniques and antibiotics. This free exchange of knowledge, even with enemies, demonstrated American confidence and generosity. Recreation programs revealed American attitudes toward women's capabilities. The camp organized volleyball tournaments, drama clubs, and educational classes. Margaret joined a choir led by
Sergeant Betty Anderson, a former music teacher from Ohio. The repertoire included American folk songs, classical pieces, and even German compositions. No one censored their song choices or prohibited German lyrics. This freedom of expression, even for prisoners, contrasted sharply with the rigid control Margaret had known. The camp library became Margaret's sanctuary. She discovered American literature, reading works by Pearl S. Buck, Willa Cather, and even translated German authors whose books had been burned in Nazi bonfires. The librarian, Mrs. Dorothy Phillips, a volunteer from Richmond, guided Margaret through American history and civics texts. Learning about the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and democratic principles from primary sources rather than propaganda opened intellectual horizons Margaret hadn't known existed. Personal hygiene facilities reflected American abundance and attitudes toward human dignity. The barracks had hot showers, flush toilets, and washing machines. German women who had endured months of field conditions could barely comprehend such luxury extended to prisoners. The camp commissary, where prisoners could purchase personal items with credits earned from work, stocked products many hadn't seen since before the war: shampoo, hand cream, lipstick, and other cosmetics that restored a sense of femininity brutally suppressed during combat service. The hair salon represented more than physical transformation. American volunteers from nearby towns operated it twice weekly, offering haircuts, permanent waves, and styling services. Margaret initially resisted, viewing it as frivolous, until she understood its deeper purpose. The volunteers treated German prisoners as they would any customer, discussing fashion, sharing magazines, and creating an atmosphere of normalcy. For women who had been dehumanized by war, these simple acts of beautification restored dignity and identity. Skill development programs prepared prisoners for eventual repatriation while demonstrating American investment in their futures. Margaret enrolled in English classes taught by Mrs. Helen Watson, a retired teacher who commuted 30 miles twice weekly to volunteer. The curriculum included practical English for medical professionals, but also American literature and composition. Mrs. Watson's patient instruction and genuine interest in her students' progress exemplified American educational values that viewed knowledge as a tool for liberation, not control. The camp's relationship with surrounding communities evolved from suspicion to surprising warmth. Local churches organized clothing drives when winter arrived and prisoners lacked adequate coats. The Rosewood Women's Club donated sewing machines and fabric, enabling prisoners to make and alter clothing. These gestures from civilians who had lost family members to German forces demonstrated a capacity for distinguishing between individual humans and enemy nations that challenged Margaret's black-and-white worldview. Valentine's Day 1945 brought an unexpected crisis of conscience. American personnel organized a dance, inviting prisoners to participate in a carefully supervised social event. Margaret watched American WACs teaching German prisoners popular dances, sharing records, and creating an atmosphere of youthful joy despite the circumstances. The sight of former enemies laughing together, momentarily forgetting the war that divided them, raised profound questions about the nature of hatred and the possibility of reconciliation. Personal correspondence policies revealed American confidence in their values. Prisoners could write letters home through Red Cross channels, subject to censorship but not prohibition. Margaret struggled to describe her experiences to her mother in bombed-out Hamburg. How could she explain hot showers, adequate food, and humane treatment when German propaganda insisted Americans were barbarians? How could she convey the respect shown by American medical professionals or the kindness of civilian volunteers without sounding like she'd been brainwashed? The spring of 1945 brought news that would shatter Margaret's world. As Allied forces advanced into Germany, camp authorities shared newsreels and photographs from liberated concentration camps. Margaret sat in stunned silence as images from Dachau and Bergen-Belsen flickered across the screen. American personnel didn't force attendance or provide commentary. They simply made the information available, allowing German prisoners to witness firsthand the extent of Nazi atrocities,
process the horrific truth about their government's crimes. The contrast between American treatment of German prisoners and German treatment of minorities was undeniable and devastating. Group therapy sessions, introduced by Captain Joyce Martinez, a psychiatric nurse, helped prisoners process trauma and guilt. These sessions, voluntary but well-attended, created safe spaces for German women to express confusion, shame, and grief. Captain Martinez facilitated discussions about moral responsibility, following orders versus personal conscience, and the possibility of redemption. Her non-judgmental approach and professional competence demonstrated American military medicine's holistic view of health, encompassing mental as well as physical well-being. Educational films about American society became regular evening entertainment. Margaret watched documentaries about American industries, cities, and daily life with fascination. Scenes of women working in factories, attending universities, and participating in government challenged every assumption about gender rules she'd internalized. The films weren't perfect propaganda. They acknowledged American problems like racial discrimination and economic inequality. This honest self-criticism from a victorious nation was incomprehensible to women raised under a regime that tolerated no dissent. The camp's response to Germany's surrender in May 1945 surprised everyone. Instead of celebration or revenge, American personnel maintained professional dignity. Colonel Thompson assembled the prisoners to announce the war's end, expressing hope for reconciliation and rebuilding. No triumphalism, no humiliation of the defeated. Margaret watched American guards who had lost brothers and husbands to German forces, treating prisoners with unchanged courtesy. This restraint in victory revealed moral strength that propaganda couldn't fake. Repatriation anxiety consumed the camp as surrender transformed prisoners into displaced persons. Many women from Eastern Germany faced return to Soviet-occupied territories where their fate remained uncertain. American authorities couldn't prevent forced repatriation, but they provided accurate information about conditions in different occupation zones. Social workers helped prisoners contact surviving family members and plan for uncertain futures. This transparency, even when delivering bad news, built trust that Margaret had never experienced with authority figures. The announcement of extended detention for denazification screening triggered diverse reactions. Some prisoners panicked, fearing indefinite imprisonment. Others, like Margaret, felt relief at postponing return to devastated Germany. The screening process itself revealed American approaches to justice. Instead of collective guilt, investigators examined individual cases, considering factors like voluntary versus conscripted service, ideological commitment, and wartime conduct. Margaret's medical service and lack of party membership placed her in a favorable category, but she watched the process carefully, noting its emphasis on documentation and evidence over suspicion. Vocational training intensified as repatriation approached. The camp partnered with American educational institutions to provide certificates in nursing, secretarial skills, and English proficiency. Margaret earned advanced medical training credentials that would prove valuable in rebuilding Germany's healthcare system. American instructors invested genuine effort in ensuring prisoners left with marketable skills, viewing education as essential for preventing future conflicts through economic stability. The first departures began in September 1945. Margaret watched friends board trucks bound for ships, their American-made clothes and Red Cross packages containing more possessions than they'd owned in years. Emotional farewells between prisoners and American personnel revealed bonds transcending wartime divisions. Sergeant Walsh, the strict barracks leader, wept openly while embracing German women she'd supervised for months. These human connections, forged despite every reason for hatred, testified to possibilities beyond perpetual conflict. Margaret's turn came in November 1945. Her final week at Camp Rosewood included exit interviews, medical examinations, and collection of testimonials about camp conditions for Red Cross records.
Captain Hayes presented her with a letter of recommendation for employment in American-occupied zones, praising her medical skills and professional conduct. This document, from a former enemy, would prove more
valuable than any possession in securing work in devastated Germany. The hair salon visit that had begun Margaret's transformation came full circle. American volunteers styled her hair one last time, presenting her with a small mirror and cosmetics kit for the journey. Looking at her reflection, Margaret saw not the defeated enemy who had arrived 18 months earlier, but a woman equipped with skills, experiences, and perspectives that would shape her entire future. The physical transformation symbolized deeper changes in understanding human dignity, professional competence, and the possibility of former enemies becoming colleagues and friends. Transportation to the port provided final contrasts with German practices. Comfortable buses replaced cattle cars. Rest stops included hot meals and medical checks. Military police protected rather than punished. Margaret pressed her face against the window, memorizing American landscapes she'd likely never see again. Towns with intact buildings, children playing freely, stores stocked with goods, all demonstrated what peace and prosperity looked like. These images would sustain her through the difficult years of rebuilding ahead. The processing center at Hampton Roads continued themes of efficiency with humanity. German women received clothing appropriate for November Atlantic crossings, food supplies for the voyage, and documentation for occupation authorities. American personnel answered questions about conditions in different zones honestly, acknowledging shortages and challenges, while encouraging hope for reconstruction. Margaret appreciated this truthfulness more than false optimism, recognizing it as respect for their intelligence and autonomy. Final medical screenings revealed American thoroughness in protecting public health. Prisoners received vaccinations, dental care, and treatment for chronic conditions. Margaret assisted American doctors examining fellow prisoners, her skills recognized and utilized despite her status. This professional collaboration, maintained until the last moments, reinforced lessons about competence transcending national boundaries. Dr. Patricia Anderson, reviewing Margaret's medical records, commented that she'd welcome her as a colleague in any American hospital, a compliment that Margaret treasured despite its impossibility. The Liberty ship Samuel Morrison waited at dock, its cargo holds converted to basic but adequate passenger spaces. Red Cross representatives distributed packages containing blankets, soap, writing materials, and surprisingly, small gifts from American church groups. Margaret found a hand-sewn needlework kit with a note hoping she would create beautiful things in peaceful times ahead. These gestures of goodwill toward departing enemies embodied American values that no propaganda could have conveyed as effectively. Boarding proceeded with minimal security and maximum dignity. No chains, no armed guards forcing women aboard. Those who hesitated received patient encouragement rather than threats. Margaret climbed the gangway carrying her few possessions, including medical textbooks gifted by American colleagues, letters of recommendation, and photographs taken during camp theatrical performances. These tangible memories would prove her experiences to skeptical family members who couldn't imagine humane treatment from wartime enemies. The ship's departure revealed final surprises. American personnel had arranged hot meals, medical facilities, and even entertainment for the crossing. German women who expected punishment found instead careful provisions for a difficult journey. Margaret volunteered for the ship's medical team, working alongside American merchant marine medics who treated her as a colleague. This continued respect extending beyond American shores reinforced transformative experiences that would influence her entire life. As the Virginia coastline faded, Margaret stood at the rail processing 18 months that had shattered every preconception. She had arrived believing Americans were materialistic barbarians who would show no mercy. She left understanding that American strength lay not in military power, but in values that extended dignity even to enemies. The hair salon that had seemed frivolous symbolized profound truths about societies that could maintain humanity amid warfare's brutality. The Atlantic crossing revealed truths that peacetime propaganda could never have conveyed as effectively.
Margaret worked 18-hour shifts in the ship's makeshift hospital, treating seasickness, delivering babies to women who had concealed pregnancies, and comforting those facing uncertain futures. American merchant sailors, initially suspicious of helping enemy passengers, gradually warmed to the medical team's dedication. Chief Mate Robert Jackson, whose brother had died at Normandy, brought Margaret coffee during a particularly difficult night, saying simply, "Doc Hayes told me you saved 3 lives at Rosewood. That matters more than uniforms." The voyage's third day brought crisis when Ingrid Mueller, a 19-year-old signal operator, attempted suicide by jumping overboard. Margaret joined the rescue effort, helping pull the hypothermic woman from November waters. As they worked to save Ingrid's life, American sailors and German medical personnel formed a seamless team. The ship's captain diverted to calmer waters, sacrificing schedule for a patient's stability. This decision, prioritizing human life over efficiency, exemplified values Margaret had discovered throughout captivity. Ingrid's recovery revealed deeper traumas among returning women. Many faced families destroyed, cities obliterated, and futures without hope. Margaret organized support groups in the cargo holds, applying techniques learned from Captain Martinez. Women shared fears about Soviet occupation, guilt over concentration camps they'd known nothing about, and confusion about their place in defeated Germany. These sessions, conducted without American oversight, demonstrated trust in prisoners' ability to self-govern and support each other. News reached the ship through radio broadcasts that revealed Germany's devastating condition. Cities reduced to rubble, millions of refugees fleeing westward, starvation threatening survivors. Margaret translated reports for women who spoke no English, watching faces crumble as homeland realities replaced American abundance. Yet alongside despair, she witnessed determination. Women began planning reconstruction efforts, pooling skills learned in camp, organizing committees for everything from medical services to education. American captivity had paradoxically prepared them for leadership roles in rebuilding. The ship's kitchen became an unexpected classroom. German women assigned to food preparation learned American techniques for feeding large groups efficiently with limited resources. The Greek-American head cook, Dimitri Kostas, taught preservation methods, nutrition basics, and creative use of surplus ingredients. These skills would prove invaluable in Germany, where food remained scarce for years. Margaret documented recipes and techniques, recognizing that survival knowledge transcended national boundaries. Radio contact with shore brought personalized devastation. Through Red Cross channels, women learned of family members' fates. Margaret discovered her parents' apartment in Hamburg had been destroyed, their whereabouts unknown. She sat with others receiving similar news, offering medical training's emotional detachment while privately grieving. American radio operators, witnessing this pain, extended communication privileges beyond regulations, allowing extra time for desperate searches through relief organization networks. The ship's library, stocked by American charities, provided escape and education. Margaret found medical texts, donated by Johns Hopkins University, including recent advances in treating malnutrition and disease. She organized study groups, teaching fellow passengers basic healthcare skills they'd need in Germany's collapsed medical system. This transformation, from prisoners to teachers, demonstrated how American investment in their education would multiply through knowledge transfer. Halfway across the Atlantic, the captain announced they would dock in England before proceeding to Germany. British authorities would process repatriations, adding bureaucratic layers to an already uncertain journey. Margaret feared British camps would reverse American progress, returning them to prisoner status. These anxieties revealed how profoundly Rosewood had shifted expectations about human treatment.
Women who had once expected nothing now anticipated dignity as a basic right. The ship's chaplain, Father O'Brien, conducted interdenominational services that attracted increasing attendance as homeland approached. His sermons avoided triumph or condemnation, focusing instead on reconciliation and rebuilding. Margaret, raised Lutheran, but disconnected from faith by war, found comfort in messages emphasizing redemption over revenge. When Father O'Brien invited her to assist with communion, serving former enemies alongside American crew, the gesture's symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Medical emergencies continued, revealing character. When the ship's doctor suffered appendicitis, Margaret led the surgery with American medics assisting. Operating in rolling seas with basic equipment, she successfully removed the infected organ. The doctor's recovery sparked conversations about her plans in Germany. He offered to write recommendations to American military hospitals in occupied zones, suggesting she could bridge medical services between former enemies. These professional possibilities, unimaginable months earlier, demonstrated how individual competence could transcend wartime divisions. Letter writing occupied quiet hours as women documented experiences for families who wouldn't believe their stories. Margaret struggled to describe American abundance to relatives facing starvation. How could she explain 3 meals daily when they scrounged for scraps? How could she convey kind treatment from enemies while Germans discovered their government's atrocities? She wrote carefully, balancing truth with sensitivity, knowing her words might provide hope or trigger resentment. The ship's crew organized talent shows to boost morale, inviting German passengers to participate. Margaret watched former enemies share stages, American sailors applauding German folk songs, while German women cheered American jazz performances. Music transcended language barriers, creating momentary unity aboard a vessel carrying defeated enemies home. These cultural exchanges, spontaneous and genuine, reinforced lessons about common humanity surviving warfare's divisions. Food storage techniques became critical knowledge as Germany approached. The ship's quartermaster, Chief Williams, taught preservation methods using materials available in destroyed cities. He demonstrated smoking, salting, and canning processes, understanding these women would face severe shortages. Margaret documented everything, recognizing that American practical knowledge might save more lives than medical training in starving populations. This willingness to share survival skills with former enemies exemplified generosity beyond obligation. Navigation lessons from sympathetic officers revealed strategic thinking. Understanding shipping routes, port facilities, and transportation networks would help women reunite scattered families. Lieutenant Commander Stevens, whose son was missing in the Pacific, spent evening hours teaching basic logistics to interested passengers. His investment in their futures, despite personal loss, demonstrated American capacity for seeing beyond immediate conflict toward long-term stability. The ship's hospital became a training center as Margaret expanded medical education. American medics shared field treatment techniques perfected in Pacific campaigns. German nurses learned triage methods for mass casualties, relevant for cities still clearing rubble-trapped survivors. This exchange of practical knowledge, initiated by Americans who had every reason for bitterness, prepared German women for challenges no traditional medical training anticipated. Weather delays extended the voyage, testing everyone's patience. Storms forced rationing of food and water, providing unwelcome previews of German shortages. Yet American crew shared equally with passengers, maintaining principles of fair distribution, despite technically being under no obligation to enemy nationals. This consistent ethical behavior, especially under stress, reinforced lessons about democratic values being lived principles rather than convenient propaganda. British coast appearance triggered complex emotions. Women who had bombed London now approached as dependent refugees. Margaret watched companions wrestle with role reversals from attackers to supplicants.
Yet British authorities maintained professional efficiency, processing documents without vindictiveness. This measured response to former enemies reinforced American lessons about democracy's strength lying in principled behavior rather than emotional retaliation. Southampton's devastation shocked even war veterans. German women who had last seen England through bomber sights now witnessed destruction they'd helped cause. Yet British civilians organizing relief efforts included German repatriates in food distributions without discrimination. This practical reconciliation, beginning before peace treaties, demonstrated democracy's capacity for pragmatic humanity. Margaret helped translate between British officials and German women, building bridges through medical necessity. The transit camp in Southampton enabled transfers to other ships, continued American standards unexpectedly. British administrators, influenced by American policies, provided adequate shelter and food. German women anticipated punishment, but found bureaucratic efficiency focused on rapid processing rather than retribution. Margaret assisted camp medical staff, her American credentials earning respect from British colleagues who desperately needed skilled help. Professional competence again transcended national boundaries. News from Germany grew increasingly grim. Soviet advances had triggered massive refugee movements. Cities lacked basic utilities. Disease threatened populations weakened by malnutrition. Margaret and other medical personnel received priority processing, their skills desperately needed. American training in public health, sanitation, and mass casualty treatment prepared them for challenges German medical schools had never imagined. The irony of enemies providing tools for homeland salvation wasn't lost on anyone. Final transportation to Hamburg revealed infrastructure collapse. Trains operated sporadically on damaged tracks. Stations overflowed with refugees. Yet Margaret witnessed extraordinary resilience. German women organized childcare, shared food, and created informal support networks. American lessons in self-governance and initiative flourished in chaos where traditional authority had vanished. Democratic principles, learned in captivity, emerged as survival tools in societal collapse. Hamburg's ruins exceeded worst expectations. Margaret's neighborhood had vanished, replaced by rubble mountains. She found her parents through Red Cross lists, living in a basement with 12 other families. Their reunion mixed joy with shock at her healthy appearance. While they'd survived on 900 calories daily, she'd gained weight in American captivity. This physical contrast symbolized larger disparities between American treatment of enemies and German civilian suffering. Medical facilities desperately needed trained personnel. Margaret reported to the nearest functioning hospital, her American recommendations opening doors closed to other returnees. British occupation authorities, overwhelmed by health crises, welcomed anyone with verified skills. She began working alongside international relief teams, applying American-learned techniques to mass casualty situations. Former enemies became colleagues in humanitarian crisis that transcended wartime divisions. The winter of 1945-46 tested every lesson learned in America. Food shortages reached critical levels. Coal scarcity meant freezing hospitals. Medicine remained desperately scarce. Yet Margaret implemented American organizational methods, creating efficient systems from chaos. She established triage protocols, trained auxiliary nurses, and coordinated with occupation authorities. Her ability to work with former enemies, learned at Rosewood, proved invaluable in multinational relief efforts. Denazification proceedings revealed American influence on British policies. Instead of collective punishment, individual cases received examination. Margaret's medical service and lack of party involvement earned quick clearance. She testified about American treatment, her accounts
helping establish precedents for handling female military personnel. British officers, initially skeptical, verified her claims through Rosewood records. This documentation of humane treatment influenced occupation policies toward remaining prisoners. Correspondence with American colleagues continued through military channels. Captain Hayes sent medical supplies through relief organizations. Sergeant Walsh forwarded care packages to Margaret's family. These personal connections, maintained despite official discouragements, demonstrated bonds transcending wartime enmity. When Margaret wrote thanking them, she received responses encouraging her work and expressing hope for future collaboration. These letters sustained morale through desperate winter months. Margaret established a clinic in bombed-out Hamburg, applying American public health principles to urban devastation. She organized neighborhood committees for sanitation, nutrition education, and disease prevention. Democratic decision-making, learned in camp self-governance, replaced authoritarian structures. Communities that embraced participatory management showed better health outcomes than those clinging to traditional hierarchies. American ideals, transmitted through practical application, took root in democratic reconstruction. International relief workers noticed Margaret's effectiveness, recruiting her for expanded programs. She trained German nurses in American techniques while learning from British colleagues. Exposure to additional international perspectives refined her American-learned techniques.
And French colleagues. This multinational collaboration, impossible during warfare, flourished in humanitarian crisis. Former enemies united against common threats of disease and starvation. Professional competence and shared humanity overshadowed national grievances in daily work saving lives. The Marshall Plan's announcement in 1947 validated American approaches Margaret had experienced. Investment in former enemies' recovery rather than punishment reflected values she'd witnessed at Rosewood. When American aid arrived, she recognized philosophical continuity from individual kindness in camp to national policy. This consistency between personal behavior and international strategy reinforced her transformation from Nazi ideology to democratic principles. Margaret's marriage to British occupation officer Thomas Hartley in 1948 symbolized personal reconciliation. They'd met coordinating medical relief efforts, professional respect developing into deeper connection. Their wedding, attended by American, British, and German colleagues, demonstrated individual relationships transcending historical enmity. When they named their daughter Dorothy after Captain Hayes, the gesture honored transformative influence across enemy lines. Emigration opportunities emerged as occupation ended. Margaret received offers from American hospitals impressed by her work with relief organizations. Though she ultimately remained in Germany, contributing to healthcare system rebuilding, the possibilities represented full transformation from enemy to potential citizen. Her decision reflected commitment to applying American lessons in homeland reconstruction rather than abandoning difficult challenges. Decades later, Margaret established exchange programs between German and American nursing schools. Her experiences at Rosewood informed curricula emphasizing ethical care regardless of patient identity. Students learned technical skills alongside humanitarian principles, preparing for increasingly international medical practice. These programs, rooted in wartime enemy treatment, fostered peaceful collaboration between former adversaries. The Rosewood reunion in 1985 brought Margaret full circle. Returning to America as an honored guest rather than prisoner, she reunited with Captain Hayes, Sergeant Walsh, and dozens of personnel who'd shaped her transformation. Their aged faces reflected satisfaction seeing former prisoners' success. Margaret's keynote address credited American treatment with inspiring her life's work in humanitarian medicine. She challenged audiences to extend similar dignity toward contemporary enemies, breaking cycles of retaliation. Her granddaughter's medical school graduation in 2010 completed generational transformation. Dr. Lisa Hartley specialized in refugee medicine, inspired by family stories of enemy kindness. When accepting her diploma from Johns Hopkins, the institutions whose donated textbooks had educated her grandmother on a prison ship, historical circles closed. Enemy prisoners' daughters had become allied healers, proving that humane treatment yields returns across generations.
Margaret's memoirs, published in 2012, documented American influence on 8,500 German women prisoners. Their collective experiences challenged historical narratives focused on male prisoners and combat. These women, transformed through dignity and education, had returned to rebuild destroyed societies using democratic principles learned in captivity. Their stories demonstrated that investing in enemies' humanity yields longer-lasting victory than punishment or revenge. The hair salon that began Margaret's American experience symbolized deeper truths about democracy's strength. Societies confident enough to extend dignity to enemies, to share knowledge with adversaries, to maintain humanitarian standards under pressure, build lasting peace through transformed individuals. Every permanent wave given to German prisoners represented American values that no propaganda could match, lived principles that converted enemies more effectively than any ideology. Margaret died in 2015, her funeral attended by international medical
colleagues whose lives she'd touched. Her legacy lived in exchange programs, trained nurses, and established clinics across rebuilt Germany. But perhaps most significantly, it survived in documented proof that enemies, treated with dignity, become allies, that investment in humanity yields compound returns, and that individual transformation can reshape nations. The frightened woman who'd entered an American hair salon in 1944 had discovered that democracy's greatest weapon wasn't military might, but consistent, practical compassion that transformed enemies into citizens of shared humanity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.